It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday evening at the most protected address in the entire United States. Reporters were standing on the north lawn, cameras rolling, doing what they do every weekend, background shots, quick clips, nothing unusual. And then, in a single heartbeat, everything changed. Dozens of gunshots, rapid, explosive, unmistakable, tore through the air just outside the White House gates. ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wong was in the middle of recording a casual iPhone video when it happened. You can see the exact moment on camera. She dives straight to the floor, the footage shaking violently as voices in the background scream, "down, down." She later posted that clip to X with 4 words that sent shockwaves across the internet. It sounded like dozens of gunshots. Within seconds, Secret Service agents flooded the North Lawn, weapons drawn, shouting at every journalist, every aide, every person in sight to run, not walk, sprint to the press briefing room and shelter in place. The entire White House complex was thrown into a full lockdown. President Trump was inside. The FBI mobilized. And 2 people were rushed to the hospital, one of them in critical condition. But here's the part that nobody is really talking about. The man who pulled that trigger wasn't a stranger to the Secret Service. They had encountered him before.
Twice.
And still, he showed up, armed and ready at the gates of the White House. That raises a question that goes way beyond this single incident. How does something like this keep happening? Let's go back to approximately 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, May 23, 2026. The sun was still up. The White House grounds were active, journalists were out on the North Lawn, press teams were wrapping up weekend coverage, and the usual security detail was positioned at their posts. At the intersection of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue and W, a public checkpoint that sits just outside the White House complex, a 21-year-old man named Nazir Best walked up to the security booth. He was carrying a bag. That in itself wouldn't have been unusual. Hundreds of people pass through that area every day, tourists and press, and political staffers alike. Best was struck by Secret Service gunfire.
He went down.
A civilian bystander who happened to be nearby, an innocent person who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, was also hit during the exchange. Both were transported by emergency services to area hospitals. Best arrived in critical condition. The bystander was listed in serious condition. One Secret Service agent was taken to the hospital as well, though reports indicated this was a precautionary measure. None of the officers on duty were believed to have been struck by Best's bullets. That detail alone tells you something important about the speed and accuracy with which the Secret Service responded. They neutralized the threat without losing a single officer. The lockdown swept through the grounds almost simultaneously with the gunshots. Agents stationed near the Eisenhower Executive Office building, adjacent to the main White House complex, also went on high alert as the sound of gunfire echoed across the area. Nobody knew yet how many shooters there were, whether the attack was coordinated, or whether additional threats were incoming. Now, let's talk about the man at the center of all of this, because his background reveals something that is genuinely alarming about how this incident was even allowed to happen. Nazir Best was 21 years old. He was from Maryland, just outside the Washington, D.C. area, close enough to have easy access to the Capitol and apparently close enough to have made this kind of trip before. Multiple sources who spoke with Fox News Digital confirmed his identity, and what they revealed about his history should raise serious red flags. This was not Best's first encounter with the United States Secret Service. He had been on their radar previously, not once, but at least twice in 2025 alone. The exact nature of those prior encounters hasn't been fully disclosed publicly, but the implication is clear. The agency had reason to know this individual existed, had reason to document him, and had reason to be aware that he posed some kind of potential concern. Yet on the evening of May 23, 2026, he walked up to a White House checkpoint with a loaded weapon and used it. There's also the matter of mental health. Multiple law enforcement sources confirmed that Best had a documented history of mental health issues, the kind of history that, in theory, factors into how the Secret Service assesses and monitors potential threats. A young man with known mental health struggles, prior contact with federal security services, and the motivation to show up armed at the White House checkpoint. That combination is every threat assessment team's nightmare. What remains unknown, and what investigators will no doubt be working to answer in the coming days, is what pushed Bess to take this action on this particular Saturday. Was there a specific trigger? A grievance? An ideology? A breakdown? Was this entirely spontaneous, or was this something he had been planning? The answers to those questions matter enormously, both for understanding what happened and for preventing it from happening again. If you want to understand just how fast and how completely the situation escalated, you need to picture what the north lawn of the White House looks like on a typical Saturday evening. It's an open space, well-lit, well-monitored, but ultimately a stretch of grass and pavement surrounded by cameras and staffed by journalists who are there to report, not to dodge bullets. Selena Wong's video tells the whole story better than any written account could. She was filming a casual social clip, the kind of behind-the-scenes content White House correspondents post all the time, when the shot started. The footage captures the exact moment the sound hit, a burst of rapid gunfire, her camera dropping toward the ground as she threw herself down, the sheer panic in the voices of people nearby. NBC's Julie Tsurkin was also on the lawn and posted in real time, describing Secret Service agents with weapons drawn ordering everyone to run inside. She estimated the total shot count at approximately 20 to 30 rounds. That number is significant. A single gunshot near a federal building triggers immediate response protocols. 20 to 30 rounds fired in rapid succession means agents are dealing with a sustained threat, not a single pop that might be mistaken for something else. Multiple news networks, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, all had crews on or near the North Lawn at the time. All of them were swept inside simultaneously. The White House press briefing room, typically the location where carefully worded statements are delivered to rows of journalists with notebooks, became an emergency shelter. Reporters sat inside the briefing room and waited, with no clear picture of what was happening just outside the walls. For the public watching from home, the images were extraordinary. A flood of social media posts from journalists pinned down inside the White House, law enforcement vehicles swarming 17th Street, and a general sense of disbelief that this was happening in real time, in 2026, at the front gates of the American presidency. The lockdown lasted approximately 45 minutes from the first shots to the all-clear. At just after 6:45 p.m. local time, the restrictions were lifted and press were allowed back onto the North Lawn. But for those 45 minutes, nobody on the outside knew whether the president was safe, whether additional threats had been identified, or whether what they were watching unfold on their phone screens was the beginning of something far worse. In the immediate chaos of a lockdown, one question dominated every news feed, every group chat, every breaking news crawl. Where was the president? White House spokesperson Stephen Chung had confirmed earlier in the day, around 4 p.m., that President Trump was at the White House. The shooting occurred just before 6 p.m. The timeline put Trump inside the building during the attack. The Secret Service was quick to issue a statement on social media confirming they were aware of the situation and working to gather information. But the critical confirmation that the president was safe came quickly and clearly from official channels. Trump was in the residence and unaffected by the incident. He had not been in any danger. The attacker never breached the White House's general perimeter. Behind the scenes, officials were briefing Trump directly on everything they had gathered in the hours following the shooting: the identity of the suspect, his background, the injuries sustained by the bystander and the agents, and the scope of the investigation now underway. The political implications of an armed attack on a White House checkpoint during an active presidency are enormous. Security protocols will be reviewed. Intelligence on known threat individuals will be re-examined. And the question of how a man with prior Secret Service contacts ended up firing a weapon at their officers is going to require some uncomfortable institutional answers. In the flood of breaking news, presidential safety updates, and analysis of security protocols, there's one person in this story who keeps getting pushed to the margins, and that's the civilian bystander who was caught in the crossfire and had absolutely nothing to do with any of it. We don't know their name. We don't know why they were at the intersection of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue at 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening. Maybe they were a tourist. Maybe they were a local resident taking a walk. Maybe they were just passing through on their way to somewhere completely ordinary. What we do know is that they were in the wrong place when a 21-year-old pulled out a gun and started shooting, and they paid a serious price for it. Law enforcement sources confirmed the bystander was struck during the exchange of gunfire and transported to a nearby hospital in serious condition. Subsequent reports raised that to critical condition. The distinction matters. Critical condition means the person was fighting for their life in an emergency room, while the news cycle moved on to debate security protocols and political optics. This is the part of these incidents that tends to get lost. When a shooting happens near a high-profile target, the narrative immediately narrows to the target, the attacker, the security response. The innocent person who happened to be standing on the sidewalk becomes a footnote. A bystander was also injured, and then the conversation moves on. As investigations proceed, and the full story of Nazir Best continues to emerge, it's worth holding on to that detail because at the end of the day, behind all the security protocol analysis and political implications, there is a real human being who is just living their life and got caught in the middle of something catastrophic. Just weeks before the White House shooting, less than a month earlier, another armed individual had breached a security checkpoint. The location that time was different. The Washington, D.C. hotel ballroom where the White House Correspondents' Dinner was being held. That event draws together the upper echelons of political journalism, White House staff, and in many cases, administration officials. It is, by any measure, a high-security gathering. And yet, a gunman made it past the checkpoint. The room erupted into chaos. Members of the press and Trump administration officials dove for cover as shots rang out in what should have been one of the most tightly controlled environments in the city. 2 incidents. Same city. Same general political orbit. Less than 30 days apart. That kind of proximity, in time, in geography, in the profile of the potential targets, is not something that security professionals take lightly. When a pattern of security threats emerges around high-value federal locations, it triggers a full re-examination of threat assessment procedures, screening protocols, and the management of known individuals of concern. Nazir Best had been flagged previously. Whatever those prior contacts with the Secret Service in 2025 involved, they apparently didn't rise to the level of action that would have prevented him from showing up armed at a White House check. That gap between flagging someone and actually neutralizing the threat they pose is exactly the kind of institutional failure that gets examined in after-action reports. The question isn't whether the Secret Service responded well on May 23rd. By every account, they responded exceptionally well, fast, accurate, effective. No officers were struck. The president was safe. The threat was neutralized. The question is, how did the threat get to that checkpoint in the first place? There is a larger story underneath the gunshots and the lockdown, and the images of journalists sprinting across the White House lawn. It's a story about the vulnerability of even the most protected institutions in the country when the right combination of factors, a determined individual, a moment of access, a failure somewhere in the intelligence and prevention chain, lines up in exactly the wrong way. The review process, now underway, will be exhaustive. Investigators will look at every piece of Best's background, his mental health history, his prior Secret Service contacts, his communications, his movements in the days leading up to the shooting. They will look at the checkpoint itself, the positioning, the protocols, the equipment, the training. They will look at the intelligence picture, what was known when it was known, who had access to it, and why it didn't translate into protective action. And then there's the broader policy question that these incidents inevitably raise. At what point does information about a known individual of concern translate into preventative intervention? Civil liberties and constitutional rights create legitimate boundaries around how the government can act on threat intelligence before someone actually commits a crime. Those boundaries exist for good reasons, but they also create real gaps that determined individuals can exploit. The White House lockdown was lifted at 6:45 p.m. on May 23rd. The press returned to the North Lawn. The news cycle moved on to other stories. But the questions raised by those 45 minutes and by the month of security incidents that preceded them are not going away anytime soon. So, where does this leave us? A 21-year-old man from Maryland is dead after opening fire on a Secret Service checkpoint outside the White House. A civilian bystander is recovering in a hospital after being caught in the crossfire. The president is safe. The Secret Service performed exactly as trained. The FBI launched an immediate investigation. The lockdown lasted 45 minutes and was resolved without catastrophic escalation. By the narrow metrics of was the immediate threat contained, this story ends well. But the broader narrative, the one that stretches back through the months, through the prior contacts and the mental health history and the correspondence dinner incident and all the warning signs that, in retrospect, were there, that narrative is a great deal more complicated. Every time an incident like this happens, the official response is the same. A review, an investigation, enhanced protocols, a pledge to do better. And in fairness, those reviews do produce real changes. Security is not static. Protocols evolve. The lockdown was lifted. The cameras came back out. The press returned to the North Lawn. And by Sunday morning, President Trump was posting his thanks to the Secret Service on Truth Social as the sun came up over Washington. But somewhere in a Maryland community, a family is grieving a 21-year-old. Somewhere in a D.C. hospital, an innocent person is fighting to recover from injuries they should never have sustained. And somewhere in the offices of the Secret Service and the FBI, investigators are sitting with a file on Nazir Best that already existed before May 23rd, trying to figure out how the story ended the way it did.